It was the day after Christmas, but inside the Ramsey house, nothing felt holy anymore. It's the morning of December 26, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. The neighborhood is quiet. Snow blankets the roofs. Garland still hangs across porches. The world, still half asleep from holiday wine and turkey leftovers. Inside 755 15th Street, the Ramsey's mansion stands silent too. But not from peace. At 5:52 a.m., a 911 call breaks the calm. A woman's voice, panicked, shrill, breathless.
911 emergency. Police, upon the 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We were kidnapped. Hurry, please, find.
That voice belonged to Patsy Ramsey, former beauty queen. The daughter she was crying for was JonBenét Ramsey, 6 years old. Tiny, blonde curls. Beauty pageant darling. Already with a string of crowns heavier than most adult egos. But within a few hours, that kidnapping became something else. The house was supposed to be a crime scene. But it didn't stay that way. People came in and out. Friends, neighbors, police. Coffee was served. Voices echoed through the living room. The ransom note, an oddly long one, lay on the kitchen staircase. They searched. Nothing. Until just after 1 p.m., John Ramsey made his way into the basement. He came back up carrying his daughter's lifeless body in his arms. Her wrists were tied. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. There was a garrote still wrapped around her neck. From that moment, everything changed. No longer a kidnapping. Now it was a murder. What followed wasn't justice. It was chaos. Media vans rolled in before the forensic team. Talk shows debated the family's strange behavior before autopsy results were even processed. America didn't just grieve. It obsessed. Because this wasn't just another homicide. This was the murder of a child. In her own home, on Christmas night. And the suspects. They were right there inside the house. There's a reason this case has never died. Not in the press. Not in podcasts. Not in the minds of millions. Because it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a puzzle made of human contradictions. How can a family so visibly broken seem so composed? How can a father say he's crushed, yet carry his dead daughter upstairs without tears? How can a mother beg for help, yet sound, somehow, strangely theatrical? And how can a 9-year-old boy sleep through everything, the ransom note, the search, the screams, then eat breakfast calmly the next morning? The death was brutal. But what came after was worse. A media storm, public judgment, years of finger-pointing, false confessions, DNA debates, lawsuits, TV specials, and still, no conviction, no arrests, not even a clear motive. Almost 3 decades later, the case remains as cold as the Boulder winter. But what if we've been asking the wrong questions? What if the killer wasn't just someone outside? What if the truth lives in both directions? Inside the home and beyond its walls. This is not a story about guilt or innocence. In behavior, in speech, in silence. Once you listen closely enough, the silence screams louder than any ransom note. This isn't the story of JonBenét Ramsey. This is the story of the murderer. December 26, 1996, Boulder, Colorado. It started with a mother's voice on the phone. She insert gon dio galanak salers a kisi guy on and kidnapping. It was Patsy Ramsey, panicked, reporting a kidnapping. Her 6-year-old daughter JonBenét was gone. A ransom note left behind, demanding money, urging silence, threatening death. But then, everything changed. JonBenét wasn't missing. She was found. In the basement. Already gone. And just like that, this was no longer a kidnapping. It was a homicide. And suspicion turned inward, onto the very people who called for help. The parents. The brother. The perfect family portrait suddenly cracked. No signs of forced entry. No footsteps in the snow. And no one else seen going in or out. So, if there was no stranger who was left, what happened that night? What evil desire drove child, a promised star, into death? This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey. Meet the Ramseys. From the outside, they were the American dream. The Ramseys lived at 755 15th Street, Boulder, Colorado in a grand, stone-faced mansion. Nearly 7,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms. A winding staircase. It was the kind of house people pointed at and whispered, "Must be nice." In their community, the Ramseys were more than well known. They were admired, wealthy, charitable, church-going, a family of high standards and even higher appearances. John, the business mogul. Patsy, the former beauty queen. JonBenét, child star. Burke, the quiet son. They looked perfect. But not everything polished is gold. JonBenét Ramsey was the picture of quiet success. Born in 1943, a former Navy man, a graduate of the University of Michigan. By 1996, he was CEO of Access Graphics, a booming computer distribution company with over $1 billion in revenue. His Christmas bonus that year, $118,000, an unbelievable everyone at that time. John was private, calculated, calm. He had 3 children from a previous marriage, John Andrew, Melinda, and Beth, who had died in a car crash in 1992. But by 1996, he had built a new life with Patsy and 2 younger children, Burke and JonBenét. John wasn't flashy. He avoided the spotlight. But everything about him, from his career to his home, spoke of control, achievement, and prestige. If John was the brain, Patsy was the light. A former Miss West Virginia since 1977, Patsy brought energy, elegance, and showmanship to the Ramsey household. She was deeply involved in the social life of Boulder's elite, a Southern belle with a polished voice and a passion for pageants. But beneath the charm, many described her as meticulous, image-conscious, and controlling. She was the one who entered JonBenét into child beauty pageants, selecting her outfits, choreographed. On the other side, from the very first day, JonBenét Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her family's Boulder mansion. Suspicion didn't fall on an unknown intruder. It fell onto the people inside that house, the ones who were supposed to love and protect her. Over the years, this internal suspicion has spawned multiple theories, each pointing to a different member of the Ramsey household. John, Patsy, Burke, or perhaps all 3. One of the earliest and most persistent theories is that John Ramsey, the father, was directly involved, or at least knew the truth and worked to cover it up. Much of this suspicion stems from how he discovered JonBenét's body. According to police, the basement room, where JonBenét was found, was not obvious or easy to locate, yet John went straight to it. He also carried her body upstairs, further contaminating the crime scene. Some believe he did this not out of panic or grief, but because he was already aware of where she was and needed to control the situation. Others argue he was protecting someone else. The second major theory centers around Patsy Ramsey, the mother. Here, the story goes that she may have struck JonBenét in a moment of anger, perhaps after a bedwetting incident or a tantrum, and unintentionally caused fatal trauma. She allegedly staged a kidnapping to protect herself and her family. The most frequently cited piece of evidence supporting this theory is the ransom note, its length, tone, and use of language that mirrored phrases from Patsy's past writing. The note was written using paper and pens from inside the Ramsey home. It was composed with time and care, something that doesn't match the behavior of a frantic kidnapper. Combined with her public composure and polished appearances, the theory paints Patsy as a woman masking panic beneath poise. Then comes the theory that Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's 9-year-old brother, may have killed his sister, either in a fit of jealousy or an uncontrolled outburst during play with a flashlight. Supporters of this theory point to inconsistencies in his interviews. His strange demeanor in a 2016 interview with Dr. Phil, and the pineapple evidence. JonBenét had partially digested pineapple in her stomach, which matched a bowl found in the kitchen, and Burke was the only one known to have been eating it that night. But, for some, it wasn't about pointing the finger at one person. It was about recognizing that perhaps the entire Ramsey family was involved in the cover-up. This theory doesn't require determining who dealt the fatal blow. Instead, it suggests that once JonBenét was dead, the family worked together to cover their tracks. This includes writing the ransom note, tampering with the crime scene, and controlling the public narrative. It's fueled by the family's united front, their lawyering up almost immediately, and a carefully orchestrated media strategy. Their consistent refusal to allow separate police interviews and the usage of public relations consultants added fuel to this theory. Many analysts note that the Ramseys, as a unit, rarely cracked, even under pressure. What's strange, almost unsettling, is that all these conflicting theories stem from the exact same pool of evidence, the same crime scene, the same autopsy, the same ransom note. Yet the more evidence appears, the more suspects emerge. It makes us wonder, are we even interpreting this case the right way? And if not, what does that say about the truth we've been chasing for nearly 3 decades? Evidence in conflict. In the bizarre mystery surrounding JonBenét Ramsey's death, few pieces of evidence have caused as much confusion and contradiction as the ransom note left at the scene. On its surface, it appears to be a classic kidnapping demand. But a deeper look reveals something far more sinister, a carefully constructed script, possibly written not to secure money, but to stage a false narrative. First, the length and setting immediately raise red flags. Most ransom notes are short, written in haste, under pressure. This one spans 2.5 pages, totaling over 370 words, and was written using a pen and notepad from inside the Ramsey home. There were even signs of practice drafts, implying the writer spent significant time composing it, calmly, without fear of being caught. This alone contradicts the idea of an outside intruder. What kind of kidnapper would risk so much time and exposure in the victim's house? The language and tone of the note swing between the theatrical and the absurd. Phrases like, "We are a small foreign faction," and "Don't try to grow a brain, John," are inconsistent, sounding less like a real kidnapper and more like someone imitating one. Several lines appear to be lifted directly from 90s action films like Speed and Dirty Harry, making the note feel scripted, almost like dialogue from a movie. It feels exaggerated, as if written to be discovered and analyzed, not to communicate with a real kidnapper. Then there's the issue of personal knowledge embedded in the letter. The demand for $118,000 matches exactly the amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year, a detail unlikely to be known by a stranger. This specificity strongly suggests the writer had intimate knowledge of the family's finances, making the foreign faction narrative even harder to believe. The note also warns the family not to call police. Yet Patsy Ramsey immediately dialed 911 without checking JonBenét's room, suggesting she may have already known her daughter was dead. This mismatch between the letter's instructions and the family's behavior adds to the suspicion that the note was not genuine, but instead a post-crime prop to mislead investigators. Handwriting analysis added further intrigue. While John Ramsey was ruled out as the writer, Patsy Ramsey was never eliminated. Some forensic linguists and independent experts have pointed to strong stylistic and lexical similarities between the note and her known writing samples. Phrases like, "Who's that good Southern common sense?" felt oddly personal, hinting at a writer familiar with Patsy's voice. Most damning of all is what the note fails to do. A real ransom letter is meant to get money and return the victim. But there were no follow-up instructions, no call, and JonBenét was already dead when the letter was found. That raises a critical question. If the note had no real purpose, what was it meant to do? The most plausible answer is to redirect blame, to mislead, to protect someone, perhaps someone inside the house. For the entrance of the murderer, at first glance, there seemed to be multiple entry points a killer could have used. Take the broken basement window, for example. John Ramsey later claimed he had shattered that window months earlier when he got locked out of the house. But when police arrived, they found a gray Samsonite suitcase placed directly beneath it, as if it had been used as a stepping stool. It looked like someone wanted to suggest the killer entered through that window. But the forensic evidence didn't add up. There was no disturbed dust, no scuffed surfaces, and perhaps most telling of all, no broken cobwebs. Whoever placed that suitcase there didn't actually use the window. They just wanted it to look like someone did. Then there's the back door. Nearly a year after the murder, investigators informed John Ramsey that the rear door of the house may have been unlocked that night. John said he had no idea. That same night, the Ramseys chose not to activate their home security system. Something they normally did when everyone was home. No alarm was triggered. No neighbors saw or heard anything. Another possible route was the basement door, which led to the wine cellar where JonBenet's body was eventually discovered. Some detectives, including Lou Smith, argued that this could have been the killer's point of entry or exit. But again, there was no solid proof of that. No matching footprints. The front door was another dead end. Literally, it was locked, showed no signs of forced entry, and there was no reason to believe it had been used at all. Even though the family admitted they didn't double-check every door before bed, it's hard to believe an intruder could have slipped in unnoticed, committed the crime, and vanished, especially in a house with sleeping family members. And what about footprints or tracks in the snow? Weather reports confirmed that there had been snowfall that night, but the police found nothing. No trail in. No trail out. There was, however, a boot print near JonBenet's body, believed to belong to a high-tech brand shoe, one that no family members reportedly owned. For a moment, it seemed like the break investigators needed. But that hope faded quickly when it became clear how contaminated the crime scene had become. Family, friends, the Ramseys' pastor, even multiple officers had walked around the house before it was secured. Any evidence that might have pointed to someone specific was effectively erased. JonBenét Ramsey was found on the morning of December 26, 1996, in a small, windowless room in the basement of her family's Boulder home, often referred to as the wine cellar. She was lying on her back on the cold floor, wearing a long, sleeved white nightgown that had been pulled up around her waist. Her wrists were tied behind her back with white nylon cord. Around her neck was a garrote, a homemade ligature fashioned from another piece of the same nylon cord, and a broken paintbrush, twisted tightly to strangle her. The condition of her body revealed two critical injuries. One was the strangulation, evidenced by deep ligature marks on her neck. The other was a massive head trauma, a skull fracture measuring about 8.5 inches. Either could have been fatal. In addition to these, there were clear signs of trauma to the genital area: bruising, a small tear, and mucosal secretions. A whitish, mucoid substance was noted in the vaginal area during the autopsy, which added further complexity to the analysis. Some forensic experts believe the substance could have been linked to abuse, especially when considered alongside the internal injuries and scarring that appeared older and potentially indicative of repeated trauma. However, in response to these implications, the Ramsey family's legal team pushed back strongly. In public statements and media interviews, especially following televised forensic analysis, their attorneys argued that the white substance could have come from ordinary hygiene products. They suggested it may have been residue from items such as body lotion, bath soap, or skin cream. This alternative explanation was offered to refute the idea that the material was related to any form of assault or abuse. A white blanket had been partially draped over her body, and a piece of black duct tape had initially been placed over her mouth, later found stuck to the blanket. Notably, both the garrote and the wrist restraints were made from materials found inside the home. The paintbrush used in the ligature came from Patsy Ramsey's personal art supplies. There were no signs that JonBenét had been dragged, as her feet were clean and uninjured, suggesting she had been killed, and perhaps staged, where she was found. The autopsy estimated her time of death sometime during the late hours of Christmas night, or the early morning of the 26th. She had partially digested pineapple in her stomach, meaning she ate it shortly before her death. Her bladder was nearly empty, and urine stains were found on her underwear and pajamas, a detail that points to physiological distress, possibly from fear, pain, or shock. One controversial element of the autopsy was the suggestion of both new and old injuries in the genital area. Some experts, including pediatric forensic pathologists, believed these injuries might point to a history of sexual abuse. They cited small healed scars and tissue damage inconsistent with a single traumatic event. However, the defense and experts hired by the Ramsey Family claimed the injuries could have been caused by other means, such as rough wiping or postmortem staging. Another detail from JonBenét's medical history was that she had previously broken her arm. While not unusual for a child her age, investigators viewed this as a potential red flag. In the context of an unexplained violent death, any prior injury raises questions. Was the broken arm truly accidental? Was it documented, reported, and treated transparently? If not, it adds to the narrative that her home life may not have been as idyllic as portrayed publicly. Make it worse, among the many strange injuries, few have generated as much debate as two small pairs of puncture-like wounds found on her body, one set on her neck, another on her lower back. These wounds were tiny, nearly symmetrical, and spaced in a way that matched the distance between the electrodes on a common stun gun. This led some investigators to propose a chilling possibility: JonBenét may have been subdued, using a stun gun before she was killed. The most vocal advocate of this theory was retired homicide detective Lou Smith. To prove his point, he conducted an experiment using a stun gun on a piece of raw pork skin, aiming to recreate the type of markings found on JonBenét's body. The result: according to him, the wounds matched almost perfectly. He even presented side-by-side photos of the pork skin injuries and the photos from JonBenét's autopsy, saying the resemblance was too close to ignore. To Smith, the logic made sense. If an intruder needed to quickly and quietly overpower a 6-year-old child, a stun gun would be a quick way to do it. There were no loud noises, no immediate visible injuries to the untrained eye, and it would allow the attacker to gain control before anyone else in the house could react. But not everyone agreed. Dr. Werner Spitz, a renowned forensic pathologist, strongly rejected the stun gun theory. In his view, the wounds lacked the telltale signs of an electric shock. There were no burns, no subdermal tissue damage, and no signs of muscle contraction or neurological disturbance, effects that typically occur when a stun gun is used on a living human. To Spitz and others like him, the marks could have been caused by something else entirely, perhaps pressure marks, postmortem artifacts, or even accidental abrasions misinterpreted in the chaos of the investigation. And then there's the most practical problem of all: no stun gun was ever found. Not in the house, not nearby, not anywhere. If someone had brought one into the Ramsey home, they would have had to sneak it in, use it with precision, and leave without a trace. Not a single fingerprint, not a footprint in the snow, and no signs of forced entry. From the moment Patsy Ramsey picked up the phone on the morning of December 26, 1996, investigators and forensic linguists have dissected every word she said. The call, which should have sounded like a frantic, terrified mother begging for help, instead came across as calculated, rehearsed, and emotionally distant.
911 emergency. Police, apply the 5515th Street. Apply on them, ma'am. We were kidnapped. Please explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left in our daughter's phone. A note was left in your daughter's phone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old.
Rather than saying, "My daughter's been kidnapped," Patsy began with, "We have a kidnapping," which immediately struck experts as oddly impersonal, almost like a press release instead of a cry for help.
She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was it? I don't know. I just have the note. Oh my God, this is the same who took her? What? Is the same who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says SBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. Okay, I'm sending him out to film, okay? Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she on here? Oh my God, please. Okay, well, I am, honey. Please.
She mentioned the ransom note before the child. "There's a note left, and our daughter is gone," she said, in that order. The phrasing alone raised questions about what was truly prioritized in her mind at that moment. Analysts found it deeply unusual that the focus was not on JonBenét herself, but on the letter, an object. This subtle shift may reveal more than she intended. Even more alarming was what wasn't said. Patsy never expressed fear that the kidnapper might still be in the house. She didn't mention the specific threats in the note, such as the warning not to call the police. For a mother who just found a ransom letter with instructions, her decision to immediately call 911 seemed to contradict the very demands of the alleged kidnappers. This has led many to wonder, was there ever a real fear of retaliation? Or did she already know there would be none? Then there's the tone. Many experts have pointed out the surprising composure in Patsy's voice. There's no sobbing, no stuttering, no erratic pauses. Her voice is clear and oddly calm in parts. Several times she says please to the dispatcher, a detail that some see as trying too hard to seem cooperative or likable. Rather than genuinely panicked. Perhaps the most controversial part of the call isn't what she said while she thought someone was listening, but what was captured after she believed the line had been disconnected. A 6-second audio snippet at the end revealed what many experts believe to be three voices: Patsy, John, and a child, possibly Burke. Patsy is heard saying, "What did you do?" John says, "We're not speaking to you," and a faint child's voice responds. This directly contradicts their claims that Burke had been asleep the entire time and knew nothing until the next morning. Although the FBI later concluded that the audio was inconclusive, many audio experts remain convinced the voices are real and significant. Additional red flags came from Patsy's physical behavior that morning. She made the 911 call from the kitchen downstairs, not from JonBenét's room or even the upstairs hallway. According to some law enforcement reports, she changed clothes and put on makeup shortly after the call. This level of concern for appearance, right after discovering your child is missing, has been described as deeply unnatural. It aligns more with image management than maternal panic. Finally, the timing of the call itself is suspect. The ransom note demanded that they not contact the authorities and set a payment window starting at 8:00 a.m. Patsy made the 911 call before 6 a.m., well outside the deadline. This suggests she was either ignoring the threat because she didn't believe it, or, as some speculate, because she knew the threat wasn't real in the first place. DNA has been one of the most controversial and misunderstood elements in the JonBenét Ramsey case. Over nearly 30 years, it has been used both as a tool for exoneration and as a shield to deflect deeper questions. But the closer investigators and experts have looked, the more complicated and fragile the DNA narrative becomes. The first round of testing took place right after JonBenét's body was discovered in December 1996. Biological samples taken from her underwear and long johns revealed traces of male DNA. Crucially, this profile didn't match anyone in the Ramsey family. At the time, this finding was kept relatively quiet by Boulder police, and due to the limitations of forensic technology, not much more could be concluded. Still, it planted the seed there was an unknown male involved. In the years that followed, around 1999 and 2000, new techniques like PCR's polymerase chain reaction were used to reanalyze those original samples. Again, the male DNA didn't match John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey. But no match was found in national databases either, and despite this result, a grand jury still voted to indict JonBenét's parents, though the district attorney chose not to prosecute. Then, in 2008, came what many believed was a major breakthrough, using a method called touch DNA, which could identify genetic material from even the lightest skin contact. Investigators once again tested JonBenét's clothing. The same unidentified male DNA was found in multiple places. District Attorney Mary Lacey took this as confirmation of an intruder theory. She publicly cleared the Ramsey family and even sent John Ramsey a letter of apology. But many in the forensic community weren't convinced. Critics argued that touch DNA can be dangerously unreliable in high-profile cases, since it can be transferred during clothing production, packaging, or even from store shelves. Its presence doesn't necessarily mean that person had contact with the victim during the crime. In fact, in 2016, a closer re-analysis, using more advanced methods like next-generation sequencing, showed something surprising. The DNA didn't belong to just one unknown male. It came from at least 2 different people, neither of whom were part of the Ramsey family. This revelation challenged everything. If multiple unknown DNA profiles existed, how could that be explained by a lone intruder? Why would several people's genetic material be on her clothing with no other signs of entry? It cast doubt on the entire theory that one foreign DNA profile could clear the Ramseys. At the same time, experts like James Kolar, a former lead investigator for the DA's office, began to warn that DNA was becoming a distraction. He pointed out that many of the materials used in the crime, cords, tape, a broken paintbrush, came from inside the house. He also raised the possibility that the DNA could have been introduced through secondary means, like staging the body with contaminated clothing. The fact that the crime scene had been heavily contaminated before being secured only deepened the uncertainty. By 2021, authorities tried again. Newer tools like WASTR typing and the MVAC system were used to pull more DNA from evidence. Over 500 items were re-examined, involving more than 1 million documents, 1,000 interviews, and 20,000 leads. Still, no clear suspect emerged. The DNA didn't match any known criminal in databases like CODIS or Interpol. Even attempts to trace family links through genealogical databases went nowhere. Meanwhile, some researchers and legal experts pointed out a serious problem. DNA was being used to rule out suspects, not to identify them. And in a case with such a compromised scene, many argued that this was irresponsible. Touch DNA doesn't tell you when it was left, how it was transferred, or by whom. Just because someone's DNA wasn't there doesn't mean they weren't involved. A 2016 docuseries raised similar concerns. It emphasized that DNA alone couldn't be the sole reason to clear someone, especially when other physical and behavioral evidence pointed toward the household. Experts warned that relying too much on DNA could lead investigators down the wrong path and prevent justice from ever being served. In the end, DNA, in this case, hasn't been the silver bullet many hoped for. It's confusing, incomplete, and potentially misleading. Rather than solving the mystery of JonBenét's murder, it may have helped hide it beneath a web of lab reports, public statements, and false hope. The motivations. It's no coincidence that suspicion has always gravitated most heavily toward the members of the Ramsey family. From the very beginning, their words and actions, whether intentional or not, seemed to broadcast signals of deception. Each of them, in their own way, displayed behaviors or histories that could easily be interpreted as motives. And when those possible motives are stacked against the actual evidence found at the crime scene, the lines between coincidence and intention begin to blur. Among the suspects, the prime one the eyes of the public obviously was Burke. Though just 9 years old at the time, Burke's behavior and the surrounding circumstances have led many to believe he may have played a role, perhaps unintentionally, in his sister's death. Burke's demeanor in interviews, both during childhood and as an adult, has frequently raised red flags. Most notably, his 2016 interview with Dr. Phil sparked public unease. Viewers were disturbed by Burke's frequent smiling, light tone, and lack of visible distress while discussing his sister's murder. Many described it as eerie or inappropriate, especially considering the topic at hand. Psychologists have pointed out that this kind of behavior could signal emotional detachment, repression, or even an effort to conceal trauma or guilt. Investigators have also noted Burke's curious absence from much of the immediate chaos on the morning of December 26, 1996, while his parents making frantic 911 calls and later discovering JonBenét's body. Burke reportedly remained in his room, claiming he slept through it all. Given the small size and quiet nature of the Ramsey home, this explanation has been questioned. How could a child remain unaware amid such emotional upheaval? Some suggest that Burke was deliberately kept isolated to prevent him from saying something that might implicate himself or the family. One of the most compelling physical clues tied to Burke is the infamous pineapple bowl. JonBenét's autopsy revealed partially digested pineapple in her stomach, indicating she had eaten shortly before her death. A bowl containing pineapple and milk was found in the kitchen, with Burke's fingerprints on it. However, both he and his parents denied giving JonBenét a late night snack or even remembering the pineapple. This contradiction fueled speculation that JonBenét may have tried to take some pineapple, leading Burke to lash out in anger. Supporting this theory, a black Maglite flashlight was found on the kitchen counter. It matched the dimensions of the skull fracture JonBenét suffered. The 2016 documentary recreated the force needed to inflict such an injury, and concluded that a child Burke's age could have done it using a similar flashlight. The flashlight was clean and placed neatly back on the counter, suggesting it may have been wiped and repositioned after the incident. Burke's history of troubling behavior also adds weight to these suspicions. He had previously hit JonBenét in the face with a golf club, a detail the family attributed to an accident. Reports also surfaced about him smearing feces on JonBenét's belongings and around the house, which some child psychologists interpret as a sign of deep-seated emotional issues. Combined with a household dynamic that heavily favored JonBenét's pageant career, it's possible Burke felt jealous or overlooked. Additionally, child psychologist Judith Dusbeber, who met with Burke shortly after the murder, described him as emotionally detached and disturbingly indifferent. When asked about JonBenét's death, Burke showed little to no sadness. In later interviews, he often gave vague or scripted sounding responses. For example, when asked how he was coping, he replied, "I was just trying to get on with my life." Too many that sounded rehearsed, especially for a child of his age. There was a chilling theory that JonBenét and Burke may have been playing doctor, a phrase used to suggest innocent childhood curiosity that crossed into inappropriate territory. According to this speculation, Burke wasn't acting out of malice, but rather as a confused and emotionally unbalanced child, trying to process complex feelings in an unhealthy way. The theory proposes that the Ramsey parents were aware of some form of inappropriate interaction between their children, felt immense shame, and never addressed it properly. As the theory goes, they weren't evil, but overwhelmed parents trying to cover up a crazy-ass situation involving their own kids that spiraled completely out of control. Some people also find it troubling that JonBenét and Burke were reportedly allowed to sleep downstairs without direct adult supervision, something that strikes many as careless, especially in a house known for hosting guests and events. It adds to the unsettling sense that boundaries in the household may have been blurred or poorly enforced. However, while the theory is provocative, it may drift too far into speculation unsupported by solid behavioral science or forensic evidence. On top of that, it's too disturbing for the children. In the end, Burke Ramsey's role in this case remains a matter of intense debate. While no definitive proof has ever surfaced, the circumstantial evidence and behavioral cues have kept public suspicion alive for decades. Whether guilty, innocent, or simply a confused child caught in an unimaginable situation, Burke's presence at the center of one of America's most haunting mysteries is impossible to ignore. For Patsy Ramsey, according to Linda Hoffman-Pugh, the Ramseys' longtime housekeeper, Patsy Ramsey began acting erratically in the up to JonBenét's death. She became moody, short-tempered, and easily upset over minor things, especially arguments with JonBenét about what to wear or which friends she could see. Hoffman-Pugh claimed she had never seen Patsy like this before and suspected that something deeper was going on. Some even suggested Patsy may have been dealing with dissociative tendencies or unresolved stress that made her unstable. Several objects found at the crime scene point to someone familiar with the house layout. A Swiss Army knife was discovered near JonBenét's body in the basement wine cellar. Hoffman-Pugh stated she had previously taken that knife and hidden it in a linen closet near JonBenet's bedroom, someplace only Patsy would typically access. Likewise, the blanket wrapped around JonBenét had just come out of the dryer, still clinging to a Barbie nightgown. Again, Hoffman-Puch said only Patsy would have known that. These details make it difficult to believe that an outsider could have staged the scene so precisely. The ransom note was found on the staircase, written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, using a pen from Patsy's desk. It was unusually long, 2.5 pages, and neatly placed, with no creases or signs of urgency. Multiple independent handwriting experts later said it was highly probable that Patsy wrote the note. Yet she never provided a written handwriting sample, only verbal denials through her attorney. Hoffman-Puch pointed out this discrepancy, noting that while she had to submit her own samples, Patsy didn't. This lack of transparency added to growing doubts about Patsy's involvement. The garrote used to strangle JonBenét was made from Patsy's own broken paintbrush, combined with cord. Experts concluded it was too complex for a 9-year-old child like Burke to build. At the same time, a grown man wouldn't need such a device to overpower a 6-year-old girl. That led many to believe it was made by someone with less physical strength, like a woman. The careful construction of the garrote pointed not to impulse, but to deliberate staging, likely by someone who cared about the child but wanted to throw investigators off the trail. Patsy was the one who claimed to discover the ransom note and immediately called 911. But rather than searching the house first or showing panic, she was dressed and made up when police arrived. JonBenét's body was found redressed, cleaned, and wrapped in a blanket. Actions that many experts saw as signs of guilt staging, where a loved one tries to cover up a crime while also showing care for the victim. There were also inconsistencies in her timeline and demeanor that didn't match someone in true crisis. From the beginning, the Ramsey resisted full cooperation with police. They delayed formal interviews and were slow to provide handwriting samples or access to certain documents. Patsy was also involved in supporting changes to grand jury secrecy laws, moves many saw as an attempt to steer public perception. Linda Hoffman-Puch testified that the grand jury investigation had focused heavily on Patsy and that she fully expected her to be indicted. That didn't happen, but the lack of closure only deepened suspicion. Patsy had built a public image around JonBenét's pageant success, and some investigators speculated that any defiance from her daughter, like bedwetting or resisting appearance standards, could have triggered a severe emotional reaction. One widely accepted theory is that JonBenét may have been hurt in a moment of rage or frustration, and Patsy panicked. Rather than facing the fallout, she may have staged a kidnapping, complete with a ransom note and symbolic garrote, to cover up what really happened. For the least known suspect, John Ramsey, in the weeks leading up to JonBenét Ramsey's death, several red flags began to emerge in her behavior and within her home environment. Teachers reportedly noticed that JonBenét, typically an independent and outgoing child, had become unusually clingy with her mother, Patsy. Experts in child psychology suggest that sudden changes like this can indicate emotional distress, often tied to trauma or abuse occurring at home. Adding to the concern, records show that multiple phone calls were made to JonBenét's pediatrician on December 17th, the same day she won a beauty pageant. Her father, John Ramsey, had attended the event and helped carry her trophies. The content of those calls remains unclear, but the timing has led some to speculate that something medical, or potentially abusive, may have triggered the need for urgent communication with her doctor. The autopsy results raised even more serious questions. JonBenét had suffered both recent and older injuries to her genital area, including bruising, a small vaginal tear, and mucosal secretions. Forensic experts determined that at least one of these injuries had occurred 7 to 10 days prior to her death. While some argued these could be the result of post-mortem staging or hygiene practices, others insisted they pointed to ongoing sexual abuse. Making matters worse, fibers matching John Ramsey's shirt were reportedly found inside her underwear and on her genitals. though never formally verified or introduced in court. This detail has fueled suspicions that his involvement may have gone far beyond simple parental concern. Suspicious events also took place just days before the murder. On December 23rd, a 911 call was placed from the Ramsey home, but abruptly disconnected. When police arrived, family friend Susan Stein answered them through the intercom system and refused to let them in. This act, strange on its own, becomes even more suspicious given the murder that followed 2 days later. On Christmas night, the Ramseys left a party at the White family's home and made a brief stop at the Stein house. Patsy and Burke went inside, while John and JonBenét reportedly remained in the car. A few hours later, JonBenét was dead. The fact that only John was alone with her in that critical time window has raised many eyebrows. John Ramsey's own behavior after the murder has also drawn scrutiny. He admitted to breaking the basement window months earlier to get into the house when he was locked out. That very same window was later cited as a possible entry point for an intruder. Critics have pointed out the odd coincidence. If this was indeed a break-in, why did the intruder choose the exact same method that John himself had used and spoken publicly about? Moreover, John was the person who discovered JonBenét's body in the wine cellar. Rather than leaving her untouched for proper forensic analysis, he carried her upstairs, contaminating the scene and making the work of investigators significantly more difficult. Adding to the suspicion, John did not initially participate in the search for his daughter, despite police urging the family to look throughout the house. It wasn't until family friend Fleet White encouraged John to check the basement that JonBenét's body was found. That hesitation, or apparent reluctance, has led some to believe he already knew where she was and didn't want to be the one to find her without prompting. Over time, some theorists have shifted blame away from Patsy and onto John as the central figure in the case. These theories suggest that Patsy may have only helped with the cover-up, possibly even writing the ransom note, while John acted to silence JonBenét to keep her from revealing abuse. For many child abusers, the threat of exposure leads to desperate acts, and in this theory, John may have believed murder was the only way to keep his secret buried. Additional rumors, though unconfirmed, have also surfaced about missing CCTV footage from a private airport where John Ramsey worked or stored personal aircraft. Some claim this footage was lost or suppressed, possibly hinting at influence or interference from someone with resources and connections. When viewed together, these details, behavioral changes, unexplained injuries, suspicious phone calls, John's peculiar actions, and inconsistencies in the intruder narrative form a troubling mosaic. Alone, any one of them might be dismissed. But collectively, they raise serious questions about John Ramsey's possible involvement and motives. The theory that he acted to prevent JonBenét from revealing a dark secret is chilling, yet it remains one of the most widely debated possibilities in this still unsolved case. The final answer. With the accumulation of troubling evidence pointing inward, the most plausible theory remains that Burke unintentionally JonBenét's death, possibly during a sudden burst of frustration or aggression. Consistent with his documented behavioral issues, Patsy Ramsey's personality traits, though high-strung and controlling, do not, on their own, present a convincing portrait of a mother capable of intentionally murdering her child. Despite her erratic behavior under stress and possible over-identification with JonBenét's pageant life, no definitive evidence exists of a violent history toward her daughter. In contrast, her emotional breakdowns and inconsistent interviews point more toward panic than premeditation. The use of the garrote, which was complex and methodical in its construction, was likely not the work of a child. It fits more with an adult attempting to redirect suspicion by creating a narrative of sexual assault and sadistic murder. The ransom note, penned in the Ramsey home on Patsy's notepad and widely believed by handwriting experts to be written by Patsy herself, is another layer of the stage scene, elaborate, implausible, and deeply personal in tone. Given these factors, It is feasible that both Patsy and John chose to protect their surviving son. Instead of reporting an accidental death, they may have conspired to craft the elaborate ransom note, stage a fake kidnapping, and distort the timeline. John's delayed discovery of the body, Patsy's link to the ransom note through handwriting, and both parents' lack of full cooperation with police in the early stages all suggest a calculated effort to shield Burke from criminal consequences, one born not from malevolence, but from desperation to preserve the family unit and protect their remaining child. Another theory, more disturbing and less substantiated, points toward the possibility of prior abuse involving John Ramsey. Autopsy findings revealed signs of both acute and older vaginal injuries, which some forensic experts interpreted as indicative of chronic sexual trauma. If JonBenét had shown any signs of intending to disclose this abuse, that could have given John a powerful and terrifying motive. However, the DNA evidence recovered from her clothing was inconclusive, traced to unidentified male profiles, but not definitively linked to John. This ambiguity keeps the theory alive in public discourse, though it lacks the firm evidentiary backing necessary for direct accusation. While deeply troubling, the idea of a father silencing his daughter to cover up molestation remains speculative, built more on circumstantial red flags and behavioral interpretations than hard forensic fact. Another branch of speculation suggests that the Ramsey family may not have acted alone. If we accept that multiple unidentified DNA profiles were found on JonBenét's clothing, alongside the unexplained boot print near her body and the possible stun gun marks on her skin, then the idea of outside involvement becomes harder to ignore. What if someone from outside the family was brought in, not to commit the original act, but to help cover it up? One suspect often cited is Gary Oliva, a known sex offender who lived just blocks from the Ramsey home. According to police records, he was known to frequent the area and had access to routes that passed directly near the house. He was arrested in the early 2000s and found carrying a photograph of JonBenét in his backpack, alongside other disturbing materials. Years later, Oliva wrote a disturbing letter from prison in which he claimed, "I never loved anyone like JonBenét. Yet I let her slip and her head bashed in." Some theorists believe he may have had a personal or indirect connection to the Ramseys, and could have been called in after Burke's alleged accidental blow to clean up the scene or stage the murder to resemble a sexual assault or sadistic crime. If Gary Oliva was truly involved, then his chilling words suggest a disturbing idea, that JonBenét might have still been alive after Burke's accidental blow, and it was Oliva who ultimately ended her life. Another shadowy figure is Michael Helgoth, who worked at an auto salvage yard not far from the Ramsey residence. He was known to have criminal associates and reportedly told friends he was about to make money from a big job. Around Christmas 1996, a pair of high-tech boots, matching the footprint found near JonBenét's body, was reportedly the type Helgoth often wore. Days after the DA publicly stated they were closing in on the killer, Helgoth died from a gunshot wound, a suspected suicide, but one that some have called suspicious. Investigators later found stun gun equipment in his residence, which aligns with the theory that such a device was used on JonBenét. If Helgoth played a role, it may have been as someone hired, or manipulated, into fabricating a crime scene more consistent with an outside attack. While these theories remain unproven, they reflect a darker possibility, that someone outside the Ramsey home helped twist a family tragedy into a calculated deception, turning what may have been an impulsive accident into a grotesque and deliberate cover-up. In the end, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history, not because of the lack of evidence, but because of how much evidence has led to nowhere. Decades have passed, thousands of pages of reports written, experts consulted, grand juries summoned, and documentaries made. Yet no indictment has stuck. No confession has closed the chapter, and no justice has been served. It's a chilling reminder that even with time, science, and public obsession, the truth can still slip through our fingers. What JonBenét left behind is not just a memory of a vibrant 6-year-old girl with a winning smile and a crown on her head, but a void. A sense of failure that justice could be so elusive. Even when it hides in plain sight, her name still captures headlines, sparks debates, and draws viewers, just not for the reasons any child should be remembered. She became a symbol not of hope or victory, but of tragedy, manipulation, and the painful limits of our legal system. JonBenét's legacy is one none of us wanted her to have. And yet, she endures, not in the way a child grows up, but in the way a mystery refuses to die. One of the most painful lessons from the JonBenét Ramsey case is how speculation, left unchecked, can become a weapon. In the years since her death, countless theories have emerged, each with their followers, their evidence, and their emotional convictions. Some believed in a family cover-up. Others pointed toward an outside intruder. Still others accused the media, the police, or even the public itself of distorting the truth. And in that storm of voices, something vital was lost focus. The investigation fractured not because of a lack of leads, but because every lead was buried under layers of noise. Competing agendas, legal maneuvering, and public obsession turned a homicide case into a spectacle. People fought for their theories like they were fighting for truth, but more often, they were fighting for their pride, their reputation, or their moment of validation. And in doing so, they left behind what mattered most, a 6-year-old girl who never got justice. Let this case be a reminder that the pursuit of justice is not a competition. It's not about being right, or winning arguments, or pushing a narrative that fits our worldview. It's about staying honest, disciplined, and committed to the truth, even when it's messy, slow, and incomplete. We owe that to JonBenét. And to every victim whose story risks being drowned in noise, we must always choose justice over ego. Beside that, it's easy to forget, in the whirlwind of speculation and televised debates, that Burke Ramsey was just a child, only 9 years old, when his little sister was found murdered in the basement of their family home. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't charged. He wasn't even officially named a suspect. And yet, in the court of public opinion, Burke has served a life sentence, not behind bars, but inside a cage of suspicion, ridicule, and relentless blame. As he grew up, the world around him didn't. Every smile, every interview, every word he said, or didn't say, was dissected under a microscope. Where most people grow into themselves, Burke had to shrink into silence. He wasn't allowed to mourn his sister freely, or live a life unchained from the shadows of that Christmas night. People didn't just question his past, they redefined his future. For inmates in prison, there's at least a wall separating them from judgment. A sentence with a number, an end date. For Burke, there was no such mercy. No closure. Just millions of strangers writing his verdict every single day, assigning him roles he never asked for: killer, liar, monster. And no matter how much time passes, the noise never fades. There's a haunting kind of cruelty in that. To be treated worse than a guilty man. At least those convicted face their sentence, serve their time, and eventually re-enter the world. But Burke, he walks free, and still isn't free. What he carries is not just the weight of what happened, but the impossibility of ever proving a negative. He can't prove he didn't do it. No one can. So whether he is guilty of something, or simply guilty of being in the wrong house at the wrong time, Burke Ramsey is a human being. And he deserved a childhood, a chance to grow up, without having to answer for the crime of being someone's brother. That chance was taken from him. And maybe the cruelest verdict of all is the one that never ends. For the parents, no matter how beautiful the house, how perfect the image, or how high the social status, children don't need pageants or perfection. They need presence. They need protection, not just from strangers in the night, but from the silence, the pressure, and the chaos that can quietly grow within the walls of a family home. JonBenét Ramsey's story isn't just about a crime, it's about everything that failed her before that final night. The misread signs, the emotional distance, the subtle dismissals, the performance of a family rather than the reality of one. For parents, this case is a reminder that you are not raising a trophy, you are raising a soul. No crown or camera flash can replace the moments when a child needs to feel heard, safe, and loved unconditionally. Don't just look at your children. See them. Hear them. Know them. And never forget, protecting your child means more than hiding the truth to save face. It means confronting the uncomfortable, even when it's inside your own home. It means standing for what is right, even when it hurts. Because the worst pain is not scandal or shame, it's losing the very person you were supposed to protect.